I'm Janicia, Centeno Castillo, Assistant Director here for LA, and we run out of Los Angeles Unified School District. We serve over 19,000 families in LA and the greater area. And what we do is we provide services and supports, wraparound supports to students and their families, as well as the educators in their world, in their universe. We start with kids when they're in 6th and 7th grade, and we follow them for 7 years. Currently, we're serving kids that are a combination of 8th, 9th, 12th grade, and also first year in post-secondary education.
That article came out. John B. King spoke about the article. He talked about it. It became like a big topic. There's a lot of highlights in LA Times and also local news around how the state university system has had the most Latino applications, and say with UCLA. So I'm just really excited to talk about it and get your take. So give me your perspective of what's kind of going on and like, what do you guys are trying to do at Gear Up for LA?
What you were sharing about the increase in college enrollment, or college applications rather, for UCLA and in the UC and CSU system. It's one side of it, but the other side, like we talked to some of the UC system folks and they say, yeah, we got an increased number of applicants, Latinx applicants. However, a lot of those applicants didn't have anybody help them with their application because of the pandemic, right? And so chances are, how many of them are actually going to be accepted remains to be answered, right? So yes, sure, there was an increase in number of applicants, but we don't know yet. At our end, we have seen a huge number of kids directly being impacted by the pandemic. We're talking, we serve it's definitely over 90% of our kids are Latinx, and we're serving over 19,000 students and families. So that's a lot of Latinx students. And in LA County alone, the mortality rate among Latinx students and parents and families and community members is just ridiculous. It's outrageous. So our students are facing decisions that they have to make. Do I get on Zoom and learn remotely, whether they're a senior or a first year college freshman, or even our 8th and 9th graders, right? Do I get on Zoom, or do I help take care of my siblings? That's one big thing. The other thing that we've seen is, do I go on Zoom, or do I get a job to help out my family because my family member has lost their job? Do I, so if they're having to make these real life decisions, and of course, right, what are they going to do? The education is going to fall to the bottom of that list when you have to decide between survival or education. And I think that for us, listening to the kids, listening to the parents, it's pretty clear. They keep saying what we need right now is we need personalized, we need proactive, we don't want a robocall, we don't want an email. They're too shut down for that. The morale is down, as you can imagine. I'm sure it's the same where you are. And so they're looking for that human connection. They want counselors, advisors that care, right? And that call them out of the blue and just say, hey, how are you doing? How's your family doing? How can we support you? And so it's for us, a lot of it is the wraparound, comprehensive, again, proactive. We can't be waiting for them to reach out when they are facing all these real life issues. With our first year students in particular, we've been monitoring their progress. We hire staff to follow them, to we like to say to intrusively advise. And what we mean by that, it sounds bad, but it's actually a good thing. What we mean is we are proactive. We don't wait for kids to reach out to us. We reach out to them. And so we started this process when the kids were in 7th and 6th grade, but in particular, spring of senior year, we started to connect them to the advisors at respective first-year institutions. And so throughout the monitoring, what we noticed was that students were not as engaged. As we got closer to the end of fall semester, we began to see in community colleges, for instance, a lot of students were dropping classes, even at the expense of getting a W, which was very concerning for us because that affects eventually that affects potentially their eligibility for financial aid. And so what we did is we started to look at the numbers, and we also reached out to the city's mayor. And we put together an event so that they could directly hear from students about what was going on, what prevented them from being successful in the fall semester, and what were the struggles that they were facing. And without going into too much detail, a lot of the things that we heard were kids, I keep calling them kids. I know that they're adults already, but they're still our kids, right? But we heard things like, I had to become a surrogate parent, essentially, right? Because my mom got sick and I had to take care of my 1 or 2 year old. I had to take care of my elementary school age sibling. And so those kinds of things. We heard a lot of mental health, wellness needs. We heard a lot about financial realities, right? Where kids' parents have lost their jobs and they're having to take on another job. So it's really difficult for them to maintain a full-time enrollment status. And so we talked about that. And then what we advocated for was flexibility in the policies at the district level in particular, because we can do all the wraparound supports that we do, but if we don't try to advocate for systemic change and support, then we're leaving behind the non-gear up kids as well, right? And so when we talked to the mayor's office about this issue, we really wanted to focus not just on the gear up students' needs, but also the non-gear up students, because it's the same across the board. Everybody's facing the same thing. And so we were very, very glad to hear that there was, in fact, an extension to, I think it's called an emergency grading policy that the community college district had. They had it last year, but we thought it had expired. And so one of the first things that they told us was, actually, we have extended it. And so they've extended it, but it hasn't been officially publicized yet. And so that's where we are right now. We're continuing to advocate so that it becomes public knowledge and kids know, because enrollment right now is still pretty low compared to other years. And so we're talking, at one point, at the very beginning of January, we were at like 50% of the kids were not coming back to community colleges in our area. And the majority of kids that go to community colleges in our city are Latinx students. And so we were, as you can imagine, we were very concerned. There has been some improvement in the last 4 weeks, thanks to a lot of we're reaching out to kids and telling them, hey, come back. This is not your fault. This is not, this is not who you are just because you got a D or an F or multiple Ds or Fs that first semester. This is not you. This is the pandemic. This is everything that's going on around you. But what we're seeing is that kids have shut down. They were closed because of everything else that's going on. And so we're still going on and continuing to advocate for that.
Yeah. What can you just for people who may not know what the emergency grading apology is, and then as well as why the withdrawal is bad, in the sense of the ramifications of it. So those two things, because I know those are
Absolutely.
natural languages for us to use, but I just wanted to make sure we can hit those.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. So it's essentially the emergency grading policy allows students to petition to be graded on a pass, no pass, instead of the typical D, F, D, C, B, A. And so that gives them a lot of flexibility because it won't count towards their academic probation status, right? So if a student at some point gets too many D's or F's, their academic progress status will be impacted. And so this is why this is so important, as well as being able to get an excused withdrawal, right? Because after so many attempted units, that also impacts your eligibility for financial aid. But if you're able to request an excuse withdrawal, it does not count against you. And so we were talking about how this is counterintuitive a little bit, because these are the kids that need the most financial aid. And yet this is where we are, because a lot of these policies, of course, are established not during a pandemic, but now this is where we are. So there needs to be some adjustments based on the circumstances.
Yeah. Can you kind of now dive into like some of the ideas that you guys suggested? From, I just really there's some really like simple ones that are like super powerful, like provide options to take less than 12 units without jeopardizing financial aid. Like I remember it, like I feel like that is such a good one, as kids have to go and be parents, and have other responsibilities, go to work. So can you just kind of talk to me about that list, and how'd you guys come up with that list? And then as well as, do you see this a common suggestions or things like this already happening across the country? Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay. So based on our conversations with students directly, as we realized that they were withdrawing from classes in higher numbers than we typically see, we began to work with them and ask them, okay, so what's going on? What are the reasons? Tell us more about what's going on. And in fact, to remain active in first year experience programs, oftentimes they have to appeal to be able to allowed to remain in those programs. And so part of the process for that appeal is asking them, what were the reasons that prevented you from being successful? And so we heard a lot from students. The things that we heard were those same things that I mentioned earlier, right? Financial reasons due to the pandemic, mental health and wellness issues due to the pandemic, and just the difficulty of learning remotely, especially in your first semester of college. I mean, some of the kids were saying, I didn't even get to graduate like a normal kid would. I didn't even, I didn't get to walk on stage. And then here I come, my first semester of college, and I am doing it from home. And so those were the issues. There was also, of course, what I said about, all of these extra other responsibilities that they have, that they can't really say, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to help take care of my siblings. No, I'm not going to go get a job if that's what's needed for the family. And so based on that, we realized, okay, so what we're seeing, there's a trend here, right? And systemically, what makes sense is clearly these are kids that did well before, wanted to be in school and continue their education. So what are ways that systemically we can help them, right? So that they don't give up, so that they don't foreclose on their dreams. And one of the things that made sense to us based on, again, what they told us was the flexibility with policies like in order for, in LA in particular, for you to remain eligible to receive financial aid as part of the college promise, you have to maintain 12 units, and also 12 units to be eligible to participate in first year experience programs. And so, but when you have to fight between maintaining 12 units or taking care of my sick parent or my sick sibling, right? That just doesn't make sense. And so advocating for some flexibility in the number of units that students take made sense, as well as giving them flexibility with the way that they're graded right now. And it's happening, we have seen it in other parts of the country. We have seen it also in our K through 12 system. And so based on that, we thought that's what made sense to advocate for. The 12 unit flexibility is something we're still in conversations about. That's the last one that is just a little harder to do.
Yeah. And so the other ones, opportunity for students to increase grades, receive fall 2020, similar to what LA USD is doing.
That's the pass, no pass. It's the same thing.
Yep. And then adjust satisfactory academic progress requirements until the pandemic. Given in it.
Yep.
Go ahead.
That's the excuse withdrawal. Yep. And
Cool.
so where we are with that is we still needed to become officially published because they have informally told us that that is so, but it hasn't been published anywhere officially. And so that's where we are right now with that one.
Yeah. Thinking about, I guess like the long-term ramifications of COVID on Latinx students. I mean, one thing that I'm looking at now, just like, Latinx has made great strides in pursuing higher education, rising from 4% to 19% of all U.S. residents enrolled in college between 1976 and 2017. But now kind of the hit that this is kind of taking in just not in just LA, but all over. What are your, I think about it like there's a lot of examples of people are also saying with women at work and women employment, the idea of all these years of getting women, in the workforce and involved has been impacted the most through the pandemic. And they're talking about there's long-term ramifications of that as well. What do you guys see as you guys talk about? I can't imagine like just you and the team all just like, because you know what it means to have a post education. And I mean, it's not just the financial earnings that these kids would make. It's not just the meaningful work. It's so bigger to the scope of the success of being an American, 20, 30, 40 years from now. So how are you guys coping and thinking through the long-term pieces of this?
One day at a time, EJ, honestly. I mean, this is huge. We've never gone through something like this. And I'm getting a little choked up right now because, I'm an immigrant. And my parents brought me here the same way that a lot of our kids were brought here, for better opportunities, for a better life, right? The American dream. And this is hard. This takes us back, right? This takes us a step back. And I think of the Latinx community, I think of our Black community, and the impact that this proportionate impact that this is having in our Latinx kids and our Black kids and our community in particular is just tremendous. And so it's going to take, I remember being in a conference once where, sorry, EJ, where it was a Gear Up conference. You may have been there, I don't know, but it was this actor who did a presentation. I can't even remember his name right now. It escapes me, but he was talking about change and how change, sometimes we think that big change requires big acts, right? But he said sometimes big change also requires a lot of little small acts, right? That accumulate. Because right now it feels to me like this pandemic and COVID recovery, we keep calling it, it just seems and feels so daunting. Like this huge thing. How are we going to tackle this? And I think that the only thing that gives us hope and helps us think of the future is actually the kids themselves and the parents themselves. Because I hear everything that they're going through, everything that they're doing, and the resiliency in our families is just incredible. And so I know that from that perspective alone, all we have to do, and I say that, lightly, but all we have to do really is put all of that brain power together, work with folks like you, work with folks, all of our partners. It's going to take, it sounds cliche, but it's really going to take a village to think about how do we move forward, because what we have done in the past is just not going to do it. We're going to have to rethink pretty much everything. And right now we need to focus on the human side of things, right? We need to get kids through this right now first. But thinking of long term, we are talking about, we have started to put together a task force within our team, that includes people from our sites, the ones that are in the front lines, right? As well as our other staff members. And the idea is that together we're going to think about, okay, what is it that we typically do? And how can we do that differently based on these circumstances? What new things do we need to think about? And that's our starting point right now.
Yeah. No, I'm glad. I'm thankful for your tears, as I feel like I've been doing it by myself, crying. Just yeah, that's good to feel it. Because yeah, I think yeah, it's just the strides and of the hard work of things like Europe that's been around for decades, and the promise programs and just all that and all the hard work, I think, the Bill Gates scholars out there that made it in that section, I think as someone like myself who got that. And I just think about, and then I just think about, compound interest and, and we have a different cadence of compound interest. And what is hard, I think I think about is like people who don't live in a metro area like LA, where, the majority of students are Hispanic. I mean, even in California, 4 of every 10 Californian is Latinx. So I think like, how do you, I know rural and other areas have different, different demographics, but how can you kind of, what would you want other people to know who maybe don't experience, the energy of LA, right? Who done experience, who, hasn't stayed in Airbnb in the areas of where your schools are, who hasn't been around, the areas and just kind of seeing it's vibrant and just it's America and it's different. And I think walking into some of your schools would be so awesome for so many people because the kids are great. What would you want people to know more about, like Gear Up for LA and just the LA community that you serve? If you were in DC or something and you were talking about it.
I would want people to know that LA County alone, it's just huge. It expands so far and wide that it's really interesting, right? The few times I have been able to go out in my car and I'm driving from like neighborhood to neighborhood, it's so surreal right now through this pandemic. you can go from one community where you see everybody wearing masks and you see people, just going about their daily lives, but, being safe. And then you can go to some communities where there's a mix of some people wearing masks, not no people wearing masks. Um, and it's interesting, right? There's also that sense of, it's like multiple worlds in one place, the diversity, the dynamics, right? The way that one block could look so different from another block down the street. I think that, and you still see that even during the pandemic, right? You see it with no pandemic, but you see it also still now. I think I would want people to know that the makeup, right? The families, the fabric, the quilt, if you will. Again, it's just so, it's interesting because I started by saying that we serve 90%, over 90% of our families are Latinx, and yet we're such a part of a very diverse community, right? And so it's very interesting. There's that dichotomy there, and then I think that that's reflected also when you see and you walk around in the city of LA, and the greater areas as well. Our program actually serves more than the city of LA. We're in across multiple cities, but all in LA County. So it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, it's always the hardest part about doing these interviews is I got to pick like 4 minutes to like, of all this great stuff we talked about. So one, I thank you. So one, I thank you always is just, one is just good to catch up as well. All like outside of this, I was wondering, I mean, um, there's at least in the tech, I live in Texas. So in the Texas world, there's this talk of a lot of California, like a California exodus from California. Um, and a lot of businesses are leaving. And I, they talk about that. And then I heard a crazy stat of how like 40,000 families in the state of California pay for half of the taxes in California. And like, I guess like there's like a lot going on around, I guess, frustration of, I guess, California, I guess, elites and them now leaving their companies and like the ramifications of that. Is that happening? Is that a discussion happening in California, or is that just something Texas people are making up?
If it is happening, I'm not aware of it, but I'm not the most, I mean, in all honesty, EJ, Gear Up is my life. I mean, I pretty much
Yeah.
work like I wake up, gear up, I go to sleep, gear up, I eat, gear up. So it's very possible that that is happening, and I'm just not aware of it because I do feel like sometimes I live in a bubble. Um, the other day, I just looked around in my house, and I was just like, here I am in my protective bubble, right? My shell, my and it's just so surreal. So it's very possible that that is happening, and I'm
Yeah.
just not aware.
Well, I saw getting emails from you super late at night while I was emailing you back, and I was like, "This is the fastest I respond is like late at night." It's these emails, and so no, yeah, I was just curious because yeah, I was just curious because I heard about it. I was like, oh, I wonder if this is something that people actually are
Well, now
feeling
I'm
or
curious though, so I'm gonna be.
yeah, I'll find some stories or data around it because I think it's yeah, like you, right? I think like I'm the same way where I got my little shell. I'm even more nervous of leaving outside because like I'm starting to get speaking engagements for like May and like in person, and I'm just like I have become so comfortable not going anywhere. Like the anxiety of leaving, I feel like an animal who lives in a cave and like the sun's out, and I'm just like, no, I just want to go back to my little sanctuary.
You're leaving the
Uh,
cocoon.
yeah, so I definitely have that anxiety now. Um, but not like you. I breathe, sleep, SSA, and the purpose of like what we're trying to do. But I made a point in the COVID era to read the newspaper, like to read local news, to read like keep up with just keep up with news. And then, and I felt like it being helpful as a leader to then connect, because I'm so into what I do, but then connect it to things that, um, so like, that's how I learned about it. I was like, oh, like this is something that, and so I started thinking about it from our partnership, and I started thinking about, oh, well, okay, well, if you're having like this issue as well, so then, but there's like this funding issue, and then I'm starting to think, well, if funding, if this impacts funding for the state or the city, like, these are just things like, got me thinking about it.
So it's interesting because I do my learning, a lot of the learning that I do from the emails that you and Michael push out on Fridays.
Yeah.
I get a lot of, I love that you limit it to 5 topics, because that's pretty much the whole bandwidth I have right now. And so those are I never failed to look through those 5 topics every week. That's what I look forward to. That's one of my things. And I think in November 1st through end of January, pretty much, I tried as much as possible to stay away from social media and news, because it was just too much. But if you ever come across any articles or things like that, send them my way. I know that they might not be appropriate for the top 5 that make it on Fridays, but that kind of stuff I'm very interested in. I don't necessarily have the time to be looking through it all the time. So if you come across something, I'm always curious.
Yeah, totally. I'm 100%. And that's what I've been doing, is like, I'll read something like, who could I send this to how can we work together to gain knowledge? And like, if one person tries to do all the reading, and it's like, it's like, how do you, like, oh, I found something. So I'm 100% will keep my head on a swivel when I thinking about California news, and also just this, cause I do, cause a part of SSA is like, and this is another side of just me figuring out, and I have talked to Lois about this, and Sharon maybe a little more than you. It's just like the responsibility I feel to the purpose of why we exist and what we represent. And the more mature I get, the more I guess sad I get of how bad things actually are, in the sense of like capitalism, and like that, like in being a for-profit organization, and then like just the responsibility also being like a Latinx successful, like like a business that's working in a space that's predominantly elite university kids would access. So there's just so then it's just like a lot of this responsibility, I feel like, of like, I mean, I don't know, just like how to, is there a way for me to do this right? And like a lot of it's taking my own sacrifice, and just like how to lead with hope, and like, oh, there's a potentially to make this work. And there's not a lot of mentors, and there's not a lot of like, I tried to tell my dad the other day, I was like, Dad, like I employ, 10 people, like, my dad has had the same job making, $40,000 since he was 20, for 25 years. And like his life is great. He hunts. I call him the Red Rican, because he's a redneck Puerto Rican. And I don't. Anyways, I always battle, and I always talk. I mean, I call Casey also. Just like the responsibility of that, of like, do it. Like, I don't want to never. I want to show, because changing the world and impact is my top priority. And somehow I fell in doing that in a technical startup, which is actually oftentimes very surface level, and they don't actually mean change as much as they like to act. And so it's just like a hard battle of trying to be right. But
I can see that. I can see that. It's interesting. It's interesting that what you said just a few seconds ago, because I think that oftentimes, especially professionals professionals like you and I, right? We always wonder and ask ourselves, are we doing enough to change, to impact, to create systemic change, to make the world a better place, right? And sometimes I'm like, can't sleep. Wait, did I do enough today? Will I do enough tomorrow, right? And somebody recently told me, yeah, see, you have to, but you know that you are, right? you can't. I said, yeah, but I'm my own worst enemy. Like, I always have to wonder, am I doing enough? Am I inspiring enough? Am I also being inspired enough by our community and by our staff? And I think that we're very fortunate with Gear Up for LA. My goodness, EJ, we've been doing this. We've been doing these staff spotlights every week. We're barely on team number 12 this week. We have 19 different teams, so we still have a ways to go. But every single little blurb that we read for each of our team members, it's like the majority of our staff are from the community that they serve, and they're doing this because they want to give back, right? And so that inspires me, seeing the kids, the parents, and just their gratitude. And I'm just like, my gosh, I am so fortunate. We are so fortunate that we get to do something that we love every day. And to get to do it with people like you. Like, I'm getting paid right now to be talking to you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of the pressure I call it is like, it's like, we did not go through the sacrifices that our parents did. And a lot of like our parents, and maybe like, they're like, oh, we sacrifice for you to live a good life. But then it's like, the sacrifices, I feel like we have to make it as quote unquote people who are like, wow, you're doing it. Like, wow, you're doing it, is like, actually, wow, the doing it, it's actually much like, there's a, like, we need a Latina, Mark Zuckerberg. We need, like, there's the distance of how far it is, 12 cents of every dollar far away. That's how far away it is. Me and you are operating on 12 cents of every dollar of other people. And so it's like, now it's like our sacrifices is like, and this is what I always like, this is why I'm like, me and my wife are very frugal. Like, we have, in Texas, we have one car. Cause I'm all like, I have no hobbies. All I do is work. And my wife said, I was like, man, you need to like go do something. I was like, I can't afford to have hobbies. It's like, I feel like I have to sacrifice my 100 years for more change, because I realized I was given the platform that came from people before me who sacrifice, to then now this platform is a responsibility. And that's the anxiety I created in my life, is like, she's like, you just need to relax. And I'm just like,
my goodness. But you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, you just described all of us pretty much. I mean, it's perfect. I love that. Yes.
yeah.
You tell your wife that it's okay. It's okay.
Thank you for watching This Week in Education. I look forward to sharing more stories from people like Janicia. In the meantime, keep changing the world.